The late summer sun spilled gold across the wide fields that bordered Marcus Green's ranch, the kind of light that made the surface of his private lake shimmer like glass. He stood on the dock that morning, boots planted firm on the weathered wood, sipping coffee from a dented thermos he'd carried since his army days. Life out here was simple, quiet, and exactly what he had worked decades to build. His ranch stretched across hundreds of acres, inherited in part from his grandfather and expanded with his own sweat, smart investments, and countless hours of labor. The lake, though, was his pride, dug and maintained by his family for nearly a century, fed by underground springs, and stocked with bass that drew envious glances from anyone who managed to get close enough to see. And yet, despite all his hard work, trouble had a way of finding him in the form of a woman everyone in the nearby subdivision referred to as Karen. Her real name was Linda Harrington, but her reputation preceded her long before Marcus ever had the misfortune of crossing paths. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, a woman who believed the rules she wrote for her neatly packed neighborhood should extend far beyond its fences, into lands that didn't even belong to them. For months, she had been pestering Marcus, sending him letters stamped with WA seals, threatening fines, and demanding compliance with regulations that had nothing to do with him. Marcus had laughed off the first few, but it didn't take long before irritation replaced amusement. After all, this was his ranch, his land, his lake. He owed nothing to her or her subdivision. It all started the week Marcus put up a for sale listing for his lake. Well, not the water itself, but exclusive fishing rights and recreational access. He thought it might be a good side income. Families, vacationers, even local companies looking for a retreat spot would pay good money to enjoy a private escape. He posted the listing online and tacked a sign to the gate leading to his dirt road. Within hours, he had calls from interested buyers. What he didn't expect was the explosion of drama from Karen. Apparently, she had seen the online post and convinced herself that Marcus was trying to sell her subdivision's lake. She didn't bother to check maps, records, or even history. In her mind, if it was water nearby, it belonged to her neighborhood, and she was determined to protect what she claimed was community property. 2 days later, Marcus awoke to the sound of voices at the front gate. When he stepped outside, coffee in hand, he was met with flashing red and blue lights cutting across his fields. 2 sheriff's deputies stood at the edge of his gravel driveway, speaking with Karen, who was dramatically waving her arms, pointing toward the water beyond his barn. "That's him," she cried the moment Marcus appeared, as though she had been waiting for her moment in a courtroom drama. "He's trying to sell off community land. He's scamming people. I demand you arrest him." Marcus, calm as ever, adjusted his hat and walked closer, the crunch of gravel under his boots punctuating the silence between her outbursts. The deputies, clearly weary, turned their attention to him. "Morning, Mr. Green," one said, recognizing him. "We got a call about some property dispute." Karen cut in before Marcus could speak. "Not a dispute. This man is a criminal. He's trying to sell what isn't his." Marcus raised an eyebrow, eyes flicking between the 2 officers before settling on Karen. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "that lake has been in my family since before your subdivision was even a sketch on a developer's napkin. I've got the deeds, the surveys, the water rights, all legal and documented." The deputies knew it too. Most folks in the county did. Karen, however, wasn't interested in facts. She jabbed her finger toward Marcus's chest. "You can't just sell a lake. That's community land. We all use it." Marcus let out a slow chuckle. "Lady, the only thing, community, about that lake is how often your folks trespass on my land to fish without asking." The deputies eventually diffused the situation, reminding Karen she had no claim, no evidence, and no authority. They left shaking their heads, clearly tired of her antics. Karen, however, stormed back toward her SUV parked at the edge of the subdivision road, shouting promises of legal action and WA crackdowns. Marcus figured that would be the end of it. But he underestimated Karen's persistence. Over the next few weeks, he received letters not only from her WA but also from an attorney she had somehow convinced to draft threatening notices. Neighbors from her subdivision began showing up near his fences, asking questions, snooping, and in one case, trying to sneak onto his dock as though the place were public parkland. What had started as one woman's delusion quickly became a headache for Marcus. But Marcus wasn't the type to roll over. He had spent too many years defending what was his to let someone like Karen bully him. So he dug into county property records, poring over maps late into the night, studying boundaries, easements, and rights of way. And that's when he saw it. A detail Karen had overlooked, likely because she never thought to check. The only road into her subdivision wasn't fully owned by the HOA. The last stretch of land, including a narrow strip that connected the main road to their private entrance, belonged to a lot that had gone delinquent in taxes. And the county had just listed it for auction. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face when he realized what that meant. If he bought that lot, he wouldn't just own another piece of land. He'd own the very access point Karen and her neighbors used to reach their homes. In other words, he could decide who got in, and who didn't. When the auction came, Marcus didn't hesitate. He made his bid, signed the paperwork, and within a matter of days, the lot, and the road, was his. He didn't brag, didn't post online, didn't even mention it to his ranch hands. He simply put up a new fence, installed a sturdy gate, and locked it tight. A bold, simple sign hung from the chain: private property, no access without owner's permission. It didn't take long before the calls started pouring in. Karen, red-faced and shrieking, showed up at the new gate demanding answers. Neighbors, confused and panicked, pleaded with Marcus to reconsider. But Marcus, leaning on the fence post with that same calm grin, simply tipped his hat and said, "Guess you should have thought twice before calling the law on me for selling what was mine." The sight of Karen pounding her fists against the steel gate quickly became a daily routine. She raged like a woman possessed, shouting threats, demanding Marcus remove his lock, and warning him that the law would be on her side. Her voice carried across the field so loud that Marcus's ranch hands joked they didn't need a rooster anymore. Karen was their new morning alarm. But behind the humor, there was tension brewing in the subdivision. The residents were trapped in a nightmare they hadn't anticipated. Without access to the main road, their only other option was a dirt trail through the backwoods, one that flooded when it rained and turned into a swamp during storm season. Delivery trucks refused to use it, school buses stopped coming, and even emergency services hesitated to risk their vehicles on the path. Marcus never blocked them out entirely. He made sure ambulances and fire crews always had access, but for everyone else, life became complicated very quickly. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, cramming into the clubhouse at the center of their subdivision. Neighbors shouted at one another across folding tables, papers flying, voices raised. Some wanted to sue Marcus immediately. Others blamed Karen for starting the mess in the first place. A few even whispered about moving, realizing that property values were plummeting overnight. Karen, of course, stood at the front like a general rallying her troops. "This is harassment. We cannot let this man dictate our lives. I warned you he was trouble. Now we must fight back." But when one neighbor asked if she had actually checked the county records before calling the police weeks ago, Karen faltered. She waved off the question, insisting it was irrelevant, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted. People were starting to see that her crusade had caused more harm than good. Meanwhile, Marcus went about his business as though nothing had happened. He tended his cattle, worked his fences, and even welcomed a group of out-of-town fishermen who had paid handsomely for exclusive access to the lake. Every time those trucks rolled past the locked gate, Karen's blood pressure spiked. She would stand there, watching strangers drive in while her own neighbors struggled to get out. Within a month, the subdivision filed a lawsuit, demanding Marcus remove the gate and restore reasonable access. But Marcus had done his homework. In court, he arrived with a thick binder of maps, deeds, and tax records. Calm and deliberate, he explained to the judge how the subdivision had relied for years on a road they never actually owned. When the property went delinquent, no one in the HOA had bothered to pay attention. And when it went up for auction, he simply exercised his right to buy it. The judge listened, flipping through the documents, and finally leaned back with a sigh. "Mr. Green is within his rights. This court cannot compel a private landowner to provide access to property he legally owns." Case dismissed. The HOA's attorney looked like someone had punched him in the gut. Karen, on the other hand, nearly fainted. She stormed out of the courtroom, muttering about appeals and conspiracies, but everyone else knew the fight was over. News of the case spread quickly through the county. Local papers ran headlines about the HOA war at the lake, painting Marcus as the no-nonsense rancher who outsmarted the meddling subdivision queen. Online forums buzzed with support for him, and strangers sent letters congratulating him for standing up to HOA bullying. For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself a satisfied smile. Back at the subdivision, cracks were widening. Neighbors who once followed Karen's lead now openly blamed her for their predicament. Some even gathered signatures to vote her out as HOA president. The same people who had once cheered her on were now packing moving trucks, eager to escape the nightmare she had created. Homebuyers steered clear of the neighborhood, and real estate agents whispered warnings to clients. Property values nosedived, leaving the residents stuck with mortgages higher than their homes were worth. Karen, however, refused to admit defeat. She tried everything: protests at the gate, angry phone calls to county commissioners, even standing on Marcus's property line with a bullhorn demanding justice. But Marcus ignored her. He didn't raise his voice, didn't retaliate, didn't even argue. His silence infuriated her more than any insult could have. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus sat on his porch sipping coffee when a moving van rolled down the dirt trail. Behind it was Karen's SUV, packed to the brim. She sat in the driver's seat, pale and rigid, glaring at the ranch. As though her stare alone could burn holes in his walls. For a moment, their eyes met. Marcus tipped his hat slowly, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. Karen slammed her steering wheel and tore off behind the moving truck. By winter, her house was up for sale. The subdivision, once bustling with manicured lawns and weekend block parties, had grown quieter. Without Karen's relentless interference, the remaining residents slowly rebuilt some sense of peace. They still used the back trail for access, but now they pooled money to petition the county for a new road, a costly lesson in responsibility. Marcus, on the other hand, thrived. His lake rentals boomed, his cattle herd expanded, and his ranch stood stronger than ever. Neighbors who once sided with Karen now approached him humbly, apologizing for their part in the drama. Marcus accepted their words politely but never forgot who had caused the trouble in the first place. In the end, Karen's downfall wasn't brought by lawsuits, police, or official sanctions. It was her own arrogance, her refusal to recognize boundaries, and her obsession with control. Marcus hadn't needed to shout or fight dirty. He had simply waited, patient as the land itself, and let her undo herself. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting orange fire across the lake, Marcus leaned back in his chair and thought about how fitting it all was. Karen had tried to take something that wasn't hers. In the end, she lost the very ground beneath her feet.